Please find your seats. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Leonard Musgrove. I am the Vice Chair of the ECC, and we are welcoming two guests from the Virginia Department of Forestry. Mr. Ed Furlow is the Area Forester Warden for the Rappahannock District, and Delaney Long, who is the Urban and Community Forestry Project Coordinator. We are happy to have them here today to hopefully answer some questions and so learn a little bit more about the care and feeding of our trees and perhaps the best tree to plant in this area of Virginia. So without any more delay, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ed Furlow.
Okay, great. I guess, yes, I'm Ed Furlow. I've been interacting with this community over the last 20 years, a couple times. I don't think I recognize anyone here, but I've been here before to talk about some fire issues. I remember he had like mulch piles on fire for a couple of years. That was a big issue, so I wasn't here. Some people are laughing about it. And then, yeah, I've been here for a few sick tree calls. Some folks have, asked me, is my tree dead or is it dying? What do I do with my tree? So I've been here a few times. I just want to start off explaining our different roles here with the state agency. I am a area forester, so just a general forester. I have background in managing like landscape-wide forests, so sort of like agriculture, tree farming, managing large tracts of forest land. So if anyone here has a big forested property outside of Lake of the Woods here, I would be the person you would contact to discuss how to take care of that forest land. There's in the forestry world, there's quite a few professions that specialize in individual tree care. So I'm the general forester, and then there's arboriculture or arborist. Those are the folks that you would call, and they specialize in individual tree care. That's who we generally we recommend that you contact if you have a concern about a tree or how to mitigate any issues with it of concern. There's some other specialties like horticulturists, folks that take care of fruit trees. Again, another specialty, maybe nursery crops. And then a new profession, a new certification through a credentialing organization, Society of American Foresters. We just come out with a urban forester program. So folks, foresters who have cross-training in between like landscape architecture and urban planning, and with a forestry background, that's new and in developing field. This is kind of what pertains to part of our agency here, especially in Delaney's role with our organization. So we have quite a few different specialists. Who do you contact depends on what your exact needs are, whether it be community advocacy or policy development versus individual tree care, versus myself. I do forestry in general, and I help with wildfires and hazard risk and assessments. Just quickly, discussing a little bit more about the state. Again, we have some urban and community foresters. I'm a general forester. We help oversee about 16 million acres of forest land in Virginia, and about 80% of that is made of hardwood forest, and the rest of it's about pine forest. So coming up and down Route 20 today, I saw a number of pine plantations that I have planted in the past, and then you see mixed pine forest out there. Some of it, which I've had a hand in replanting or developing, and I've given a lot of assistance to landowners to help manage those forest land. And what else does does our department do? We talked about urban community forestry, forest land. We do a lot of wildfire suppression this time of year. So if you're not aware, this is our wildfire season. Again, we say no, if you're outside this community, we say no burning until after 4 p.m. I believe there's restrictions in the community for burning. Yeah. So this is the prime time for our wildfires. So in case you do have some property off this community and you need to burn some brush piles, I advise you to wait till a different time of year, maybe during the summer when everything's green and growing. That's generally going to be the safest time in Virginia. Maybe we're not in a drought. Then we also have forest health staff. We have entomologists and forest health specialists. They deal with invasive species, invasive insects. Fire ants is a new thing that's been marching up this way. Believe it or not, I think Goochland might have the nearest identification of fire ants. So whoever here hates fire ants, and I've been bit by fire ants before, hopefully they won't be here, but it wouldn't surprise me if they will get here in a few years. So our agency, Forestry World is a very diverse world. We touch upon a lot of different subjects, and but today we're here to talk about your urban and forestry questions, and Delaney here is our urban specialist and a project coordinator for some of our programs, and I'll pass on the torch here, and she will answer your questions and talk a little bit about our programs and what we do.
All right. Good morning. My name's Delaney, and if it's all right with y'all, I'll just give kind of a general overview of what we call urban and community forestry, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges that trees in a community or a more public-facing environment face that are a little bit different than the challenges trees in a forest or a more wild setting might face. And I'll also talk a little bit about recognizing tree risk. Ed mentioned that you all were a little bit interested in that, and then I'll talk about some of the programs our Urban and Community Forestry Department has, and how that might be of interest to you all as a community. And then if you want to ask questions and kind of keep it casual, we can do that. So, and if you're getting bored, just tell me or act like you're falling asleep. And then I'll know we can do a little bit different format. But I guess urban and community forestry, we kind of define as the big picture of having a healthy urban or public-facing tree canopy, from establishing new trees, maintenance and care of those trees throughout their life cycle, and then even thinking about the end of that tree's natural life cycle, and thinking about things like what we call urban wood utilization, and maybe if a tree does need to get removed, kind of investigating ways that we could use the wood from that tree for maybe creating something functional, or a piece of art that is kind of becoming popular in the U.S. With trying to use urban wood if trees do need to get removed, so that we're not just sending them to a landfill or into a chipper when they might be repurposed. And I'm sure we all know that trees provide really a multitude of benefits, from improving our water and air quality. Leaves are filtering out particles from the air, purifying the air that we breathe, intercepting excess storm water and rainfall that might otherwise flow into our waterways without any kind of interceptance of harmful contaminants or whatever else might be in that excess storm water. and they provide food and habitat for wildlife and pollinators in our area. And there are also social and kind of financial impacts, like shade and reducing energy costs in our homes, as well as just health and emotional benefits. So it's important to have a healthy tree canopy, and I think we can all kind of agree on that. So I guess, like Ed was saying, there is another important aspect of this kind of forestry, which is called arboriculture, and that is kind of looking at trees on a more individual basis and thinking about tree health and disease and care maybe for individual trees. And so looking at the big picture and thinking about trees on an individual basis are both really important for having a healthy forest over time. I guess a few of the challenges of trees in more of a community environment outside of that typical forest setting. One is soil compaction. When there's a lot of development and high use going on around the areas that trees are in, which is a good thing. We want to be out there enjoying our trees and coexisting with that kind of environment. It can kind of cause a compaction aspect to the soil. The soil can get pretty compressed, becomes a little more difficult for water to infiltrate that soil, for oxygen to move through the soil. So that's something to be aware of in a more urban or public setting. Mechanical damage, more people means maybe more cars and lawnmowers. Those can all be harmful for trees at some point if, if we accidentally wound a tree with a lawnmower or a car. So they just have a little more exposure to that kind of damage. Something common that you'll see when new trees are getting planted frequently is sometimes they're planted too deep. So has anyone ever seen a tree that just kind of looks like a light pole in the ground? And I guess something important when thinking about planting new trees is that you want to make sure that what's called the root flare is exposed. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say the root flare? It's kind of the base of the tree that starts to widen up. And that's actually where the roots start to get oxygen. So I've heard people say that for every 1 inch that a tree is planted too deeply, that's 10% less oxygen that the roots are going to be able to get. So that's kind of a common thing that we'll see sometimes in urban or kind of public-facing areas. Tree topping. Has anyone seen tree topping? And sometimes it seems to folks that could be the only answer, if a tree is outgrowing its space. But that drastic cutting and removal of large limbs on a tree ends up causing more harm than good. It creates a lot of open wounds on the tree. Overall, there's going to be less leaf area, which causes that tree not to really be able to perform its natural processes like photosynthesis to the best of its ability, and eventually causes decline over time. And then one of the last common ones is improper mulching. Has anyone ever seen what we call a mulch volcano? And does anyone have an idea of why we want to avoid kind of the volcano look? Yeah, you're smothering it, just like we talked about with the root flare. Being covered up, you're kind of reducing the amount of oxygen that the roots have access to, and I guess when the mulch is really piled up against the trunk, it can actually build up moisture, maybe cause the bark to flake off a little bit, open that tree up to potential bacteria or wounds over time. So we like to say mulch out, not up. Make a little bit of a gap between the trunk and where that mulch starts. and you're kind of trying to provide insulation and nutrients for the roots of that tree rather than kind of mulching up that trunk. So those are just some of the more common things that we see in an urban environment, and they're things that are easy to talk about, that we can kind of keep an eye on and maybe mitigate if we're seeing things like that. And I guess there are a few misconceptions around trees. Some people think that maybe more trees mean more problems, more responsibilities, and they certainly take work. But overall, I think having that healthy forest canopy kind of outweighs the maybe negative impacts associated with just maintaining that canopy. So I guess if you all would like, we can talk a little bit about recognizing risk in trees, and when we're done, if y'all want to talk a little bit more about that, or if you want to look at some photos of what to look out for, feel free to talk with us. We have a few pictures on the computer here if you want some more clarification. But I guess there are a few defects that you can be on the lookout for in trees that might just mean that there's a little bit more elevated risk with a part of that tree potentially failing over time, or being a little bit more of a risk. And before we talk about the defects, I'll just say that just because you might see one of these doesn't automatically mean that that tree needs to be removed. It might just be something to keep an eye on, something to get a professional opinion on from a certified arborist. A lot of times, tree health problems could be mitigated in some way or another, rather than just having to remove that tree. So I guess the first one would be codominant stems. If you're seeing a tree that has really large codominant stems, so like a split trunk, and has a really deep V shape, that could just be a sign that the bark and the trunk right there is going to be a little bit more structurally weaker than if that tree were just a single stem. So it'd be something to keep an eye on, be thinking about how that tree is looking even outside of that stem. I guess root problems, 80% of a tree's roots are found in the top 18 inches of the soil, which is pretty shallow. It's easier for them to kind of move through the soil in that top 18 inches, but it also means that they're a little bit more exposed to what we're doing on top of the soil. So just, I guess if you're seeing really exposed large roots on a tree, that could be a sign that maybe those roots are just a little bit more vulnerable because they are exposed. Or if you're seeing roots that seem to be wrapping around the base of a tree, that's usually a sign of pretty restricted growth and can cause what we'd call girdling roots, which over time could kind of strangle the tree a little bit and cut off flow of nutrients to the rest of the tree. So if you're seeing that somewhere, we want to be mindful of maybe that tree's health over time. Any kinds of evident cankers, wounds, large cavities on a tree, something to be aware of. Could be the minor start of an issue, or it could be a wound that, if not kind of sealed over properly, could allow more infection or disease to enter that tree. Often healthy trees can compartmentalize a wound like that, but if there are several stressors already affecting that tree, maybe we're in a drought, or maybe there have been some pests in the area defoliating that tree a little bit, and then on top of it, it gets a wound. So often factors that stress trees end up compounding. If you're seeing a tree in major decline, it usually means that there's more than one thing that has been happening. And again, any external sign of decay, so if you're seeing bark missing, very discolored trunk, if you're seeing fruiting bodies, mushrooms, or some sort of fruiting body on a tree, that's a pretty telltale sign that there's some rot happening internally. So that would be a big sign to take a note of. Any dead branches that might have potential of falling during the next storm, or branches that seem to have a really heavy weight load towards the end of the branch, making them a little more riskier for snapping over time. And then just human-caused defects. You know, if you see topped trees around, those are likely gonna enter this spiral of decline, or maybe be less resilient during a storm, which is when a lot of kind of the hazardous tree problems make themselves visible, is when we have hurricanes or flooding and inclement weather, which there's no shortage of in Virginia, and we know how unpredictable that can be. So I guess it's important to assess your trees before and after a storm, and the best way to do that and have a really good idea of the state and the health of kind of the tree canopy in the area is to have an ISA certified arborist monitor those trees and do something called a tree risk assessment. And in a tree risk assessment, we're looking for those signs, the defects that we just talked about, but that assessment is also taking into consideration, well, how likely is that tree going to fail, and when? Like, do I think it could fall down tomorrow, or do I think in the next couple of years it could maybe become more and more hazardous? So thinking through some of those questions, thinking through the likelihood of impact, you know, if that tree were to fail, is it gonna fall or a branch break off in a place that no one's ever really around, or is it a very high use place next to where someone parks their car, or something like that? And so just thinking through some of those kind of hypothetical questions, but an arborist would be able to use their knowledge of different tree diseases and kind of the rate of decline to determine whether any kind of mitigation actions are needed, or if removal would ultimately be kind of the best course of action. So that's a really brief overview of thinking about risk, or starting to think about risk. And I'll just reiterate again, arboriculture and certified arborists do have specialized skills in being able to diagnose some of those problems, and urban foresters and the Department of Forestry, we focus more on kind of the big picture of forest health and the maintenance of a healthy tree canopy. And in Department of Forestry's UNCF program, which UNCF is just Urban and Community Forestry, we have two kind of main grant programs that we work with folks across the state on. One is called Virginia Trees for Clean Water, and it is primarily a new tree planting grant program. That is what I'd say a lot of my job is. I do a lot of new tree planting projects, and communities, organizations, local governments can apply for this grant, and the projects can range anywhere from like a neighborhood tree planting to a riparian buffer, maybe turf to trees, kind of converting a grassy area maybe into a forest, creating a food forest. The projects are pretty diverse. If you're interested in more information about that, be happy to talk with you. And then another grant program that we have had historically, I guess, it's just called the Urban Community Forestry Grant Program, so that one's pretty easy to remember. It is only open for about 2 months out of the year, whereas the other one is open kind of year-round. And it's federally funded, so typically it opens in the fall. I will say this year, we don't yet have confirmation whether that program's going to be funded or not, but just in case it is, I wanted to mention it in case it was of interest to you all. But that grant focuses more on kind of long-term planning, care, and development of urban trees. So that grant could be used from anything from hiring staff to help maintain an urban forest to maybe doing something that's called an urban heat island study. We've done that in some cities across the state, trying to figure out which areas should be prioritized for creating and sustaining new tree canopy based on kind of how hot it gets during the hottest times of year. Could also be used for a tree inventory if folks just want to see kind of what they already have and what is the state of those trees that they already have. That would kind of fall under this grant program. And for individuals, something you might be interested in is right now from March 1st to May 1st, there's a discount happening with retail nurseries in Virginia. You can get $25 off a native tree or shrub. So I figured I'd throw that one out there. It's a pretty good deal. Only with participating nurseries. There's a few nurseries in the state that applied to do this program with us. And on the Department of Forestry website, you can search Throwing Shade VA, and you'll see a list of those nurseries that are offering a discount. But I guess more than anything, you know, as an individual thinking about planting the right tree in the right place, where that tree is going to get the light requirements that it needs, the moisture requirements that it needs, and is not going to outgrow the space that you've chosen for it, is important to think through when talking about site selection, species selection. There are some great resources out there for Virginia. If anyone's heard of the Plant Virginia Natives campaign, there are regional guides all throughout Virginia that show you good species for the area and kind of what growing conditions they need to do well. We've also brought some tree owners manuals if people want to take some of those home today that talk about proper planting, proper maintenance, and just being able to sustain your trees over time. And have a little pamphlet on recognizing tree risk and a list of other resources if you all want to do some investigating on your own. But I guess all that to say, having a healthy tree canopy in the community does take time and planning and work, but the benefits that a healthy tree canopy provides is really invaluable to the community. And we're lucky here in Virginia to have tree professionals and different programs and resources that can help us kind of facilitate that and make it an attainable goal. So that's kind of all I have for right now, and I'll hand it back to you.
If you would like to ask a question, we'd like for you to come to the podium. State your name, lot, and section, and so now we would open it up for questions for anyone who would like to come up. Please.
My name is Jenny McCluskey. I live on Jefferson Avenue off of Monticello. I have two different questions, and one is, knowing we have a lot of woodpeckers and animals that do survive with eating bugs and tree stuff, and with the storm we had 3 years ago, the ice storm, I had a lot of tree breakage with especially the pines, and a lot of topping of trees came down. and they basically got cleaned up just to get off the street, but the rest of the trees are still there, and they're, most of them are around the street area where the bus stop is and that kind of thing. But these trees, these pine trees have now become very barkless, and I'm just not sure what to do with them, whether or not to just leave them, because obviously there's birds eating bugs and that kind of thing. So that's part of the question, the one question. And the second question is, we have a tree, at least one tree, maybe more. I have a lot of trees on my property that are just basically forest trees. They're part of my property, but I don't clean up leaves or anything like that in there because of pollinators, etc. But they have trees that are both the builder of my house, which is only 3 years old, and the utilities, the power company, has said, no, we can't take that tree down. It's leaning over the road, but also over some power lines. But it's just a weird-looking tree that's very big, but they said, we can't take it down. The ECC says we can't take it down. I don't know what to do with that kind of thing. And do I get an arborist in there to see the health?
You want to talk about it?
Sure.
You want me to?
Okay. I guess in regards to the trees that you said there's been a lot of woodpeckers and kind of missing a lot of bark and they're making a lot of holes, eating a lot of bugs. I'd say if it's safe to leave them alone, then it's always a good thing to have trees like that, because some wildlife does prefer kind of dead or dying trees to burrow into that wood. So if you are able to leave them up and it doesn't bother you, then I'd say that's good habitat and kind of a resource for them. If they're unsafe and they're dying and could pose a hazard to you, then you would want to think about the removal. But outside of that, it's not a negative thing to leave them up. And in regards to the power company, I'd say I guess it was my understanding that if a tree is already touching some part of that utility line, then normally the power company should be contacted as someone to kind of take ownership. But it sounds like, okay, I would say, yeah, an ISA certified arborist or a tree care company, like an accredited tree care company that could assess that and figure out how to safely go about that would probably be the best option, because there could be a lot of hazards associated with being that close to a power line. But Ed, do you have anything to add to that?
I've seen the Dominion Power and co-ops, utility co-op foresters, maintain power line corridors. And in general, if rules might be a little different out in the rural landscape, but they maintain those corridors between 4 and 6 years. There's a lot of miles that they travel, but they do maintain their easements just to ensure that those trees that are threatening the power lines, that they're not going to knock them down. So there is some responsibility from the power line companies to electric companies to maintain these power line corridors.
With regards to leaning trees, our committee often gets a tree request for a tree that's leaning. Does that necessarily indicate that tree should be removed, or is there something else that can be done to perhaps save that tree? Question.
I'd say it doesn't always need to be removed. I guess it depends on how much it's leaning. I think there is some sort of percentage of leaning where it starts to become unsafe. I'll have to check what that is. But I mean, sometimes if the tree otherwise is looking in good health, it can be okay. Sometimes trees will kind of bend a little bit to get a little more sunlight, which could be the situation, but it could be some sort of structural issue. So I'd say it just depends on the individual tree and it depends on what all is around it, whether you'd want to take sort of a corrective action to that.
So would it be safe to say that in a situation like that, an arborist should come and investigate that prior to us giving them the okay to remove that tree?
I mean, my tendency is to always have a professional look at it, because if you can save it, I mean, over time, it might save you money to have someone look at it, because it might be one less removal that you have to do. But if it's clearly dead or dying, then I would say that that'd be up to you. But if it otherwise looked pretty healthy, then I think it'd be worth getting another opinion. Do you have anything to add to that, Ed?
Yeah, I guess you would just have to qualify, whether it's a risk or not. It's something that should come down, and a lot of times you'll see storm damage, push against trees, and in this ISA tree risk assessment form, I brought it with me, ask you if the roots are more than 50% exposed, that's one indicator of some sort of risk. So, if you look at a tree that's bending over, and if it's not just naturally bending over to get more sunlight, if it's if its roots are uprooted, then there is some reason to assess it for structural failure. But again, if it's in the middle of the yard, it's not going to hit anything. Does it have to come down? Maybe not. But if it's threatening something, and there's you can't prove there's an impending failure, maybe that could be a good reason to cut it down.
Sir?
My name's Bill Mann. I live in Section 1 on Green Spring Road. I've got 3 mature ash trees on my property, and I was wondering if there's any effective treatment in Virginia for the ash borer.
Yeah, there is, and I guess it sometimes depends on kind of what state your ash trees are in. If they still have, I guess, maybe a 75% canopy that's not dead or in decline, then a lot of times it is worth it to try to save those trees. And there's an kind of injecting treatment that you can do, and I think there's actually a cost share program in Virginia if you have ash trees that you think might qualify for doing this cost share program. You could contact Department of Forestry and have someone come out and assess those trees, make sure they're still kind of healthy enough to justify trying to do this treatment to save them, and then fill out the cost share and kind of get reimbursed for doing this treatment on the trees. And I'm forgetting the name of the insecticide at the moment.
Yeah, imidacloprid is, I believe what we use, we recommend for cost share. And, the emerald ash borer has been around for at least 10 years. It's been impacting the county for at least 10 years. And so we've been offering this financial assistance to landowners for quite a few years, maybe 2016 or so, or 2018. I don't know. I know last year we offered cost share financial assistance, because it can be expensive for large ash trees to be treated correctly. We're talking about using pressure to inject pesticides into the tree, and that would help it out for a couple of years. It would kill the bugs and keep them from causing any further damage. But I'm not exactly sure if it's being renewed again this year. But again, go back to an arborist, someone who's trained to do the work. They can, they have the right tools, and they can inject the tree, do it correctly. If not, you can just do a root drench. You can go to your, Lowe's or your nearest co-op. You can get some Bayer product, and it'll offer some resistance, tree resistance. It'll kill some of the bugs, but it won't guarantee a complete kill. But it'll offer some help. But the difference is that it's affordable for a lot of people. we're talking about, $20 for a bottle versus, a couple $100 per treatment per tree. Yeah.
Next question.
Hi there. My name is Nicole Pappas, and I have one follow-up question on the removal of trees, and that is, do you recommend, and what is the benefit of leaving a snag? So instead of just taking the tree down to the roots, leaving 4 to 5 feet of the tree, is there a benefit to that? Do you recommend it? The second question is specifically in Lake of the Woods, what trees do you recommend we do not plant? For example, a Bradford pear or something. Are there, trees that you say don't do these and trees that you would recommend? The last question is for the ECC, and that is when we have a lot of lots now that are being built that were empty, and they're going in and taking every tree on the lot, leaving not even any space between the property. I mean, it's just they go clear to the property line. I have a friend who, when that happened, they came over, for example, and took over 5 trees out of her property. As a mitigation, the ECC said, okay, plant 5 trees to replace that. The 5 trees were planted on the new property. The property was sold, and the new owners came in and cut all those trees down. So, I mean, we just have a decreasing amount of trees, and what is the ECC doing, and what can be done to make sure that we're not just denuding land?
Well, first we'll answer your question about types of trees, and then we'll answer your question about that.
That was a lot, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I guess in response to the snags, again, if you can leave part of it up, and I guess there's still a chance that that could fall over at some point in time. But yeah, if it's not too large, I think there could be a benefit to leaving it for woodpeckers, other wood-boring birds or insects. And yeah, there are a lot of benefits to having a snag up, specifically for wildlife benefits. And I guess that's kind of all I have on that. I think it could be beneficial. It's not necessary, but I think if you want to have a little more diversity in your backyard, then it could be a good thing to leave up. And Ed, you might be able to speak a little bit to the trees in this community, since you have a better understanding of the area.
So, if you talk about snags, are we talking about dead trees, like our dying trees? Is that what you're referring to, or just like a branch up top, or what was the exact definition of a snag that you were using? Did you say snag?
Yeah, like when you don't take down the whole tree, you leave a part of the tree for insects.
Okay. In general, we say, don't top trees, because trees grow different than shrubs. And then if you do have a tree that has a top cut off of it, you may have branches that grow back upright along the side of the tree, but the top of the tree will continue to rot from the top down. So it's weak up top, and the tree will slowly die. And then there's any large branches that will grow out of the top will eventually fail. That's what we recommend. That's why we tell people not to top trees. Obviously, certain questions, what trees to plant, what trees not to plant. There are really hardy species out there, and then there's trees that you shouldn't plant. There's, obviously the invasive species you shouldn't plant. You can still buy them at nurseries. What we recommend you don't, because they get out of control. Newest thing I've seen, people will put up privacy fences, and they'll use Chinese silvergrass. It's a new tall grass, new problem I've seen, and it spreads rapidly. The question is, if it escapes out into the forest environment, there won't be anybody else to control it. But there, yes, there are a list of hardy trees, plenty of resources online. I think Delaney will share some links, listing of native trees, and you can go onto any arborist websites, and they'll explain the benefits of each species and the tolerances of each one in an urban setting compared to a forest. So you can get a maple tree, and there's all sorts of maples that are out there. Some are just hardier than others. Same as elm trees.
And I guess I'd add to that, like Ed was saying, avoiding invasive species. One that I recently was trying to talk a family member out of planting was Chinese privet. It grows very fast, and sometimes it could kind of create a hedgerow, which is what my family member was trying to do, but they tend to take over, and they're really hard to stop from prolifically growing. I think Japanese privet may still be sold, may be sold at some nurseries, but I'd say try to avoid those and look at your regional native list of trees and shrubs and think about what kind of goals you have. And then silver maple is something that is native, but I will say it just has a little bit more of a risk with developing those co-dominant stems that we were talking about. So if you want to avoid that, I would recommend maybe planting a different kind of maple if you're thinking about maples, maybe sugar. Would probably do well in this area, some red maples. But silver maple can develop or start to have co-dominant stems and be a little bit weaker structurally over time. So that'd just be a caution with the silver maples. So.
With regards to the ECC's role in new builders, we recommend, or we require rather, that a builder provides us a clearing line for the trees, which is typically 10 feet away from the house structure. Any trees outside of that 10-foot is to be left alone. And I understand that in some cases, some builders have removed all the trees or most of the trees, which is in violation of the ECC's ruling. In that situation, we are requiring those trees to be replaced with a 2-inch diameter tree. And a 2-inch diameter tree, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 8 foot tall. And those trees should be replaced on the property. As far as someone else's property being have trees removed, if we are aware of that, we can investigate that and deal with that on an individual situation. But that is our ruling, and that's what we require for trees that are removed beyond that clearing line.
And I do have just a follow-up comment on construction. Again, with arborists, they do offer some services where they can help the landowners who want to develop a lot. If they don't want to cut down all the trees, they can offer some protection on the existing trees, ways to mitigate construction damage. So I often see trees slowly die 5 to 10 years after construction. A lot of times that comes from soil compaction, just damage to the trees. But some of that can be mitigated by good practices, by preventing large machines from running over tree roots, from having soil dumped on top of those tree roots and suffocating the tree. So for anyone here who is thinking about doing some lot work, maybe doing some construction, there are ways to mitigate damage to your existing trees and keep them from slowly dying.
Next question.
Good morning. My name is Chris Scheich. We're at 5225. What are suggestions for proper maintenance of understory of these beautiful trees that we have, especially to mitigate fire type of concerns? Like we have lots of saplings.
Yeah, we have an expert here, Jim here, Jim Funk. I've worked with Jim here before in the community, and he used to be our hazard mitigation specialist. So you do have some community members here that specialize in fire prevention.
We're used to grass all around our homes.
Yeah.
And we're used to mostly grass in our old house. Our trees were very far away.
Sure. But quickest answer, you can go onto, look into FireWise principles, and you can search that online, and it'll give you a diagram. It'll explain prevention measures around your house that you can take.
Like, is it okay? Well, I know around the house, I'm talking about the understory of the foresty, of the tree lines areas. Saplings, bushes, ferns, leaves,
Yeah.
blowing leaves.
Yeah, and there's with the FireWise principles, it shows you, different rings of activities that you can do to improve fire readiness, fire prevention around your, mitigate fire damage to your house, your residence. So it could be like right next to your house, away from your house, and into the woods surrounding it. It will give you ideas what to do.
Okay, so for the wooded part, that's what I'd like to concentrate on a little bit, is if we just think of it as like when we're hiking through the wilderness, as long as our understory looks like that, we're good? Is that a good way to think of it?
It's hard to say, what does the wilderness look like? Forests are changing all the time. So you could have a forest that looks like a park. You could have a forest that looks like a brand new forest with lots of small trees. It's just which stages of evolution is the forest in?
Very tall, very low. So that's, in other words, there really isn't anything right now to think about.
Yeah, so it generally comes down to, someone with experience just having to look at it and say, these are based on your goals. What do you want? What are your objectives for that forest land? Maybe we can give you some I can give you some ideas of how to best take care of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it just usually takes me to look at it and give you some good ideas.
John Bell, Section 14, Latin ID, and no, I'm not on the board of directors. There's two John Bells. So, question, our community, this community-wide look, we have rules, a lot of rules, call it Lake of the Rules, and the ones that deal with what ECC does, my summary of them is they strongly discourage cutting trees, period. And they were set up 60 years ago, so as you might expect, we now have a lot of really dense stands that are even age and go falling apart. And, okay, so do you have, are there a resource through state forestry or somewhere that provide rules, guidance, community-wide guidance in a way to have, our community regulations that would encourage a healthy forest rather than discourage it, and that would, maybe take into account that trees don't live forever and you've got to replace them at some point, even though it's maybe a human lifetime out. So, but I mean, is there anything like that that could provide us? Obviously, I'm used to management at a national forest level, not in a community, but it's kind of don't like it. Oh, sorry. Yeah. In general, is there, do they provide advice to a community on what sort of rules and regulations it should have to encourage a healthy forest in the very long term?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, sounds like he's asking if we have some sort of rules or even structure to be able to advise on kind of long-term health of stands. And we do, I guess, Department of Forestry, foresters have the ability to write what's called a forest stewardship plan, or in this case, what would be probably more applicable is something called a community forestry management plan. And we tend to also kind of steer away from removals, talking about removals. We don't offer removals, but what a community forestry management plan could do is it would involve a forester, probably the community forester for this kind of region of Virginia, coming out, doing an initial sort of broad inventory of what's already here, some of the common species that are in Lake of the Woods, what the overall forest health is looking like, and then kind of a management plan for the future, and maybe even kind of a timeline of suggested management activities. So that could be something, if you all were interested in having a community forestry management plan that DOF could help with. And another option, and again, this is assuming we have federal funding for another program this year called Urban Community Forestry Grant. That is something you could potentially apply for and receive funds to even have a contractor or tree company come do maybe a more in-depth assessment of the property and kind of develop this holistic management plan. So you kind of have two options there. And then I'd say the more in-depth option would probably be applying through that grant. But we also have local foresters that are able to sort of start the process of coming up with a management plan, and that would also be dependent on what the community's goals are. So they would create that kind of with your goals in mind.
Hi, Jack Simons, Lot 85, Section 13. On behalf of everybody here, I'd like to thank ECC and you for coming for this excellent program. My question to you is there a specific website where these resources are available? Can you cite that out and people can note?
Yeah, actually, Ed and I have kind of a list of different really helpful websites and resources. I've printed several out if people want to take them home or even take a picture if we run out. Department of Forestry's website has a resource library of a lot of different resources. One really good one, it's called How to Kill a Tree, and I brought that one today. It's just kind of some common things that we can do, maybe unknowingly, that over time could damage trees. Resources about our programs and what DOF can offer, and then other resources about finding an arborist. There's a website called treesaregood.org where you can search for a certified arborist by location, find several people in the area, you know, if you needed different estimates on things or wanted more than one opinion. ANSI Tree Care Standards. ANSI is American National Standards for Tree Care, if you want to learn more about that. So when we wrap up, we'll make sure to have some of that sitting out here. And if we run out of copies, if you want to take a picture. Yep.
I'm not sure we want people to know how to kill trees. If you
Well, this will tell you.
Sorry.
My name is Vicki Hayden. I live on Antietam, which is near 9.9. We have trees growing on our property, which I don't see very often around here. It's the hemlock, which I think is a beautiful tree, native tree. I love it. I would buy more, except I discovered I have a woolly adelgid. Is there a cure or any remedy? Is it a tree I should avoid buying?
Yes, it's awesome that you're seeing some hemlock. Unfortunately, they are affected by something called hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an invasive pest, and over time can defoliate the tree to the point of it being so defoliated that it can't kind of take in the central sunlight and conduct photosynthesis, which leads to decline. But the good thing is there are some treatment options. Again, like we were talking about with the ash, if your hemlock is still at a point where it can be saved. It's not kind of over this threshold of decline. It could be treated by a soil drenching process with something called either dinotephuron for really heavy infestations or imidacloprid for maybe a little bit of a medium or lighter infestation. And it's something that would need to be repeated every couple of years if you want to maintain the health of the hemlock. And it's been successful on trees that are still in a somewhat healthy, maybe lighter infestation stage. And DOF has had a cost share program for that too in the past, where you can apply, maybe have someone come take a look at this hemlock to see if it's eligible, if it's worth spending the money to do this treatment, and then get reimbursed to, I believe it's either up to $500 or half of the expenses for treating the tree. So if it's still in decent condition, if it doesn't look dead, then it'd probably be a good candidate for that cost share program.
Should I think about buying any more?
It depends on how much you want to take on. It'd be great to have a larger population of hemlock in Virginia, but I guess know that if you were to plant more, they would likely also at one point in time get infested, and it'd be a commitment to give them that treatment every couple of years, and it'd be kind of an investment of time and money to maintain them. So I'd say it's a personal decision. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Hello. T.C. Phillips, Section 8, Lot 68. So I have a couple questions for you. What would you consider the actual life of our forest right now here at Lake of the Woods? Is it at the end, in the middle of its lifespan? Because obviously we have to be able to clean out some of the dead wood and fallen trees. Part of the problem is really cost, right? Who's going to pay for it? Based on what Ginny had said earlier about whether or not the electrical power people will come and take care of its leaning over thing, or someone else is going to do it. It's a cost issue. So my question is, would grants cover some of that for Lake of the Woods, i.e. maybe training a arborist so that we would have one on staff where we wouldn't then have to go out and then the residents wouldn't have to bring somebody in and pay them to do it? There's just an additional cost. I mean, tree companies running around trying to cut down every tree they can, and they'll say they have somebody they can sign a letter. And I'm saying this from practical experience because I was on ECC and I did a lot of tree inspections, and I'm not an arborist. So my question is, how do we deal? That's really the business side of this that's struggles for the residents, right? How do we fix that? Does a grant allow us to train somebody? Can we do that? And what is the requirements for a certified arborist?
Are there any grants?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about grants and the certified arborist qualifications. Ed could probably speak a little more to the state of the forest here. I haven't had the chance to see the area, but yeah, talking about maybe the opportunity to train someone and have an arborist in this community, that would be most applicable to that urban community forestry grant, which is the one that is dependent on funding later this year. So it's kind of at a crossroads right now. But there is kind of a category in that grant program to apply for funding for hiring someone, maybe on a specific contract. And so that could be an option in thinking about the qualifications that an arborist has. Usually to apply, you have to apply to become a certified arborist, and to get kind of approved to do a training and take an exam, you have to have some sort of, I guess it has to either be a combination of educational and professional experience. I think it's maybe 4 to 5 years combined if you have some professional education in forestry, arboriculture, and then a combination of some hands-on experience in that sort of tree world, then you could apply to do a training and take an exam. It starts out kind of taking you through tree biology and the basics of tree biology. There are sections about tree pests, diagnosing different diseases. It gets kind of scientific, but it's still at more of like the practical level.
So I think you've answered my question. That it's
Okay.
probably easier to hire somebody that has that qualification than it is to try to get someone qualified.
Yeah, I mean, unless you have someone here that has that background and wants to take that on, then it could be great. But you do have to have a little bit of a background in trees to just apply to get that certification, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Quickly, I want to amend one answer I had earlier. Someone asked about EAB treatment, and I did mention imidacloprid works like a soil drench, but specifically for the stem injection, the reason why it's so expensive to treat large trees is because you're using a special technique and a special pesticide. It's called emamectin benzoate, and you can find it on our website. But
Usually to apply, you have to apply to become a certified arborist, and to get kind of approved to do a training and take an exam, you have to have some sort of, I guess it has to either be a combination of educational and professional experience. I think it's maybe 4 to 5 years combined if you have some professional education in forestry, arboriculture, and then a combination of some hands-on experience in that sort of tree world. Then you could apply to do a training and take an exam. It starts out kind of taking you through tree biology and the basics of tree biology. There are sections about tree pests, diagnosing different diseases. It gets kind of scientific, but it's still at more of like the practical level.
So I think you've answered my question. That it's
Okay.
probably easier to hire somebody that has that qualification than it is to try to get someone qualified.
Yeah, I mean, unless you have someone here that has that background and wants to take that on, then it could be great. But you do have to have a little bit of a background in trees to just apply to get that certification, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Quickly, I want to amend one answer I had earlier. Someone asked about EAB treatment, and I did mention imidacloprid works like a soil drench, but specifically for the stem injection, the reason why it's so expensive to treat large trees is because you're using a special technique and a special pesticide. It's called emamectin benzoate, and you can find it on our website. But we didn't want to confuse anybody. It's a certain specific treatment using a different pesticide. But forest health in general, if you go across the road here to the Germana historical property, I looked at some of the trees there over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and some of those trees are, if I remember right, they're almost 200 years old. So, theoretically, we could have, oak trees that could last 200 years, because we can see it right next door. But then you got the community here and, the impacts of just an urban environment. It's tough on trees. So you're not just, basing the lifespan of a tree on, the climate and the environmental stress and then the soil types that they're growing on. Again, you got these external factors that can change the lifespan of trees. And then, depending on, what type of trees were here when the community was first founded, if it was mostly pine trees, probably timed out by now, 50 to 100 years. A lot of these Virginia pines are short-lived, and they will die anywhere between 50 and 100 or so, maybe a little longer. So it just depends. There are trees that are short-lived, and you expect them to die in a short term. And then you have these climax species that can live a much longer lifespan. And then sometimes, you see you'll see yellow poplars, even though they can live a couple hundred years. They grow fast and they become hollow. So, in this case, a lot of people are concerned about hollow trees being risky. So, you're not certain, whether that tree is just a hazard or not. If it's an indicator of an old forest or not. But just because a tree grows real quickly and gets real big doesn't mean it's really old, I should say. It just gets a lot of sunlight. So don't be misconstrued about how of trees' age just based on its size. That's another caveat there. You could have very small trees that are really old. They just have stunted growth because they never received a lot of sunlight in their lifespan. Yeah.
So the answer is it depends.
It really depends on. So the answer, yeah. So if you had some sort of accounting, inventory of the tree species in the community here, you could estimate.
But I do have
their
some
age.
experience when it comes to building two homes. Heavy equipment you won't know it right away, but within a year or two, especially what I saw was in the oaks, they die.
Yeah.
And 10 feet is not a huge distance when you move in heavy equipment across roots and everything. So, that's going to happen. So that cost then, again, happens to the resident afterwards, right? So I can understand some people wanting to take care of the trees up front when they're building a home rather than... So there's a lot of variables on this.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions about oak decline in Virginia. A lot of people are worried about sudden oak death or oak wilt, but there's no examples of overnight tree death here in Virginia. We do have environmental stress, so you might see trees that will lose their leaves in the summertime prematurely just through environmental stress. Doesn't mean that they're going to die, and you shouldn't just come down the next winter. You should wait to see how they respond next spring. A lot of times
one other question: when an arborist comes in and they sign saying the tree is dead, do they have any liability issues?
I guess, so if you're a certified arborist and you see something that is a hazard and you know that it's a hazard, you're kind of required to make that known to the community. And then it's up to the landowner, the community, whoever's going to make that final call whether to, I'm going to take your advice that you're recommending to remove it or not. But they do have kind of this obligation to say, I'm seeing a hazard that really should be addressed. And so hopefully everyone is conducting their work in that kind of way. And as far as legal actions, I'm not sure. Luckily, I haven't been in a situation like that, but I think it's just this kind of principle of good faith that if you see something, say something and recommend the best practice. If it's not removal, then you like to think that an arborist has the tree's best interest in mind. If it doesn't need to be removed, there's some other course of action that they would recommend. So.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thanks for answering the questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of different licenses from the state. And in Virginia, there's not a license to practice forestry or arboriculture. I know the state of Maryland has some licensing requirements. So that may impact how any civil remedies are approached.
Very good. I'm Jim Funk, Section 2, Lot 357, and I am delighted that there's this many people coming in here to talk about, about our forest. I worked a little bit on the ECC for like a year or so. I do appreciate all the kinds of problems that are brought to you and having to make the decisions between cutting and leaving. We do have a love-hate relationship, with the trees. We love to see them bloom and shade us and all this kind of stuff, but we hate them when we have to cut them down. We also hate them when the leaves come down, but they are this community. And this is really something that I think urban forestry can truly address. Trees are a major issue as far as down power lines. Trees are an issue as well as the way the community is developed with our housing. This is a community at risk according to the Southern Wildfire Risk Assessment. It's a large community. We have the opportunity for house-to-house fire as well as far as wood fire. But urban forestry, I believe, could be a goal of this community to develop a truly healthy urban forest. People do have a problem understanding what is a healthy yard, what is a healthy forest in their yard, and its surrounding areas. And I do think that that's something that between forestry and arborists, can kind of help facilitate that information, because what I see the community missing is information. The community forest plan, I think, would be a great start. If that could be done through a grant or whatever, but at least understanding what this forest is in our surrounding area. We've got National Park, on our backside. They have a totally different management concept than what we do. So that's an issue at risk. So between wildfire and power lines, better understanding of ECC about urban forestry and individual tree care, better understanding with our landowners, understanding what is and what is not a healthy or an at-risk tree. All of those kinds of things are going to be very, very beneficial to this community. It just helps with the overall safety of the community. There's a committee, safety and security, that's also looking at some of these other areas, maybe where the wildfire risk can also be addressed. As far as a question, it's really not so much a question as much as it is just a comment to ECC that if that can become a goal for urban forestry to really be a piece of this community, I think it would be a benefit.
Next.
Hi, my name is Matthew Tierney. I'm a production arborist of 22 years and an ISA certified arborist of going on about 17 years. And as an arborist, I'm so excited to hear people talking about trees. And I'm sitting back there and I really want to be a part of the conversation. But I did have a couple things that I felt like I could add. I hear a lot of the questions coming in. Again, thank you for coming out. Thank you for the ECC for putting this on. I think that the Lake of the Woods passion for their trees is exemplary for our state. I don't know if a lot of people complain about the restrictions, but without those guidelines, a community can quickly become deforested and we lose the whole reason why we moved here. So thank you. A couple things that I wanted to help answer. One was 15-degree lean. That's generally beyond which it's beyond phototropism. The tree's not growing out on its own. Usually there's some extenuating factors, but we can look for root plate upheaval. But just because it's a leaning tree doesn't mean it's a hazard necessarily. But I do understand there's, a leaning tree can be very disconcerting. The ash tree treatment, and used to be Bayer. They were bought out by BioAdvance, one of our favorite products to recommend. We don't make a penny on it, but I can tell customers you can go get it at your Home Depot, Lowe's. I think the Ace Hardware here has it. You can get it in granules or liquid. It's a great systemic. It's usually good for about a year. It's a great broad spectrum insecticide, and it has a mild fertilizer, which we don't recommend, by the way, fertilizing your trees, just as a rule. And we can talk about that why, but it's generally, I'm not a big fan of that. The understory fire risk, mainly for our deadfall. You know, if you have pine trees that have accumulated, that have died, that are, you know, laying about, you know what deadfall looks like. That's where the fire risk can be a problem. We employ 5 part-time employees that are full-time firefighters, so they are well-versed in what, you know, these risks can be and what happens when they're not taken care of. I mean, we look and see what happened in California when they don't address their understory deadfalls. The certified arborist, when you have an ISA certified arborist come to your property, I don't know if we have a code of ethics that we are beholden to. We are not allowed to recommend removal of a tree unless there is a risk or you have expressed a concern that we can confirm. I have been called out to many of your properties, and I've met many of you on your properties, and more often than not, I am in a position where I am talking the customer out of removing a tree because there is no risk. If it's a leaning tree, or you know, they see that it hasn't leafed out yet and they're concerned, or you know, we can see, well, it has buds on all the extremities. You know, this is a tree that should not pose any risk. Very rarely do we, and we are required to point out trees that we do find as a risk. So just because we say, you know, have you looked at this tree? You know, this is why. Mr. Wemmer's was here. We were walking his property, and I noticed a torsion fracture in one of the trees, and I pointed it out to him as a mature oak in his backyard. I said, this tree has been fractured. It's going to be very likely to fail. I have to point it out to you. I don't care if we do the work or someone else does, but this should be addressed. He did not have us do the work. He had someone else that was able to come and do it. It is a requirement for ISA certified arborists to be honest with our knowledge. So make sure when you have someone come to assess your trees, they are an ISA certified arborist, and have them show their certification. Look them up on the ISA website. It's something we take a lot of pride in, that we put a lot of effort into, and we like to know that we're giving you our honest opinion. I think that was it that I wanted to say, so I'll sit back and try to restrain.
Awesome.
Yes?
Are you required continuing education credit?
Yes, every year. So I attend the Tree Care Industry Association that has more classes than you can take in a 5-day period. They've started offering them online so we can go back and watch them. I am a education junkie. Like, if I can't continue to learn something, I get bored. So there's always something new to learn. It's part of the reason I love being an arborist, because every tree is different. You know, every situation is different. So yes, we are required for continuing education, credits, and yes, absolutely.
Go ahead, ask the question.
As far as the leaning tree, I do lean medicine. When I go out, if it's leaning or concerned, the first thing I do is look at the leaf ball, if it's going up, has this truly grown as a leaning tree, which I look at differently.
Sure.
And if it's no movement at the root ball, is it fair to say that it's still pretty safe if it simply is going that way without the leaf ball starting to pull up?
Yes, the question is, if a tree is leaning and the root ball or root plate has not been displaced, is it safe? Most times, yes. Most time that we can ask for, has this tree always been leaning, or how long have you been here? How long have you noticed it? We can also look at the growth pattern of the limbs. If those limbs, if you look at that tree in relation to the other trees in the canopy, and those limbs are all angled at a slightly different angle than similar species, that would say that something has caused that tree to lean. But if the trunk is leaning, but all the limbs are more or less in the same orientation of all the other trees, that's a tree that has been growing in that orientation. If you've ever noticed a tree that gets leaned over by a storm or something, and then 10 years later it has branches, and those branches have righted themselves, and they have grown in the correct orientation that it's used to, So we can look for those factors. A lot of the ice storms and things that cause pine trees can actually bend them and cause some fractures in the wood, not ones that will cause failure, but may weaken it. Again, torsion fractures are one where the tree twists and the cracks are between the grain, and some of those pine trees can continue to lean. So.
And is, one last thing, on deadfall, I have a very large tree I certainly don't want to lose, but it's not in a place that it would be a danger. Is there a health advantage to making sure they're cut off, or do you?
Do you mean like a tree that's still...
I have a tree with a couple of sizable branches that are dead as doornail, but the rest of it's good. It's to my advantage to find a way to get up and cut them off.
Right. The short answer is no. People ask me this all the time. You know, I want my tree to be healthy. Take the dead wood out. It's like, well, it's technically not going to improve the health of the tree. It can limit the amount of time that...
Story. It was just in the Piedmont of Virginia. And it's just because it's dry throughout the winter. Those woods would cure. You have field moisture inside the wood that would get below 20%, and then it would completely consume any deadfall. So when you have that deadfall, large fields that are near living trees within 3 feet, there is a risk that deadfall could kill standing trees. But nowadays, it's been such a wet. Even right now, it's been a really wet winter. So the fires that we have are associated with dried leaves and dry grass, stuff that you can easily put out with water. And so today, I don't see a lot of the big fuels being consumed completely. Mainly, it's just the outer layer that's rotten that burns up, and then the fire department can come in and put water on it. So, in the event that the climate changes here in the next couple of years, if we have different patterns again, where we have extremely dry summers, or just periods of dry spells like we had 2 years ago, that would dictate whether extreme loading of fuels in the understory of your forest could pose a significant threat to your residents.
So I have yet to see...
Story. It was just in the Piedmont of Virginia, and it's just because it's dry throughout the winter. Those woods would cure. You have field moisture inside the wood that would get below 20%, and then it would completely consume any deadfall. So when you have that deadfall, large fields that are near living trees within 3 feet, there is a risk that deadfall could kill standing trees. But nowadays, it's been such a wet. Even right now, it's been a really wet winter. So the fires that we have are associated with dried leaves and dry grass, stuff that you can easily put out with water. And so today, I don't see a lot of the big fuels being consumed completely. Mainly, it's just the outer layer that's rotten that burns up, and then the fire department can come in and put water on it. So, in the event that the climate changes here in the next couple of years, if we have different patterns again, where we have extremely dry summers, or just periods of dry spells like we had 2 years ago, that would dictate whether extreme loading of fuels in the understory of your forest could pose a significant threat to your residents.
So I have yet to see any understory or wooded area in Lake of the Woods that I would consider a fire hazard. Usually we'll see a stand of pines that are decimated by pine bark beetles that are still standing dead. Then now they start to fall down and crumble, and now you have deadfall all around those standing dead ones. Then you have the risk of really something taking off, consuming the deadfall, taking off into the trees, getting passed from canopy to canopy. Now you have something that's uncontrollable. I have yet to see that. We love to see leaf litter. We want anything around the trees to mimic what you would see in the forest. So a nice, healthy, undisturbed layer of leaves is great. That doesn't mean take all your leaves and pile them up against the edge of your trees. That's too much. But yes, a nice, healthy, undisturbed layer of leaves, that'll give all your pollinators a nice insulation to overwinter. Don't worry about picking up your deadfall. That's not going to disturb, the important things that are left there. It's not going to disturb the ecosystem to the point where you're going to, you're going to damage the life cycle of the pollinators, things like that. So if you have a deadfall in your backyard, yeah, pick it up. A tree. Sticks and twigs, if it doesn't bother you, it's no big deal. It's not going to be a fire hazard. But I understand you don't necessarily want to look at all the twigs. Don't feel like you have to leave the twigs to protect the environment. So that's... Yeah. There's a very interesting book, The Secret Life of Trees, that goes into detail about that. And there's, I'm sorry, you were going to add to, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Right. So it's less of whether or not they're communicating with each other, but it's more to the fact that tree roots, and this is something I can give you that everyone should know this. A root system of a tree is expansive. We think of tree roots coming in those bagged in burlap sets when we buy a tree. You go out into a mature tree that's 24 inches in diameter, and the minimum root zone of that is going to be about a 12-foot radius. That doesn't mean that's where all the roots are. Those roots can run for 50 feet if they have a water source that they've identified. A tree roots can grow in incredible ways. A good rule of thumb, though, is you take the diameter at breast height of any tree on your property and you convert that from inches. So if we have a 24-inch diameter tree, we would say, generally speaking, that's going to have a 24-foot diameter root protection zone. So if we were called in prior to, say, a construction event, and we wanted to set up root protection zones for all the mature trees that the homeowner wants to keep, we would put fences at the border of that. And if there's anything visible that tells us, well, we have a good feeder root, a big buttress root that goes in this direction, we'll make concessions for that. But the rule of thumb is going to be 1 foot diameter for every inch diameter at breast height for that tree. So if you go around your yard and you see you have trees, that area should have leaf litter or mulch. If you have grass on that by itself can be a problem for the trees because grass loves what? They love water. They also, what kind of soil? If you know how to make your grass turn green, you put, a lot of people put lime on it, right? Especially in Virginia. Lime. Well, that's great for grass, bad for trees. Trees love acidic soil, okay? So where we're liming our yards, we're actually decreasing the tree's ability to take nutrients up. So giving those roots that area that they can call their own by establishing the mulch beds, that's by and far the number one thing I see that people can do to make sure the trees stay healthy. And that goes to why we don't recommend fertilizing. Usually it's not necessary if you just give the trees the area they need. The construction damage. So there's about a 7-year window where a tree's root damage can manifest in decline of the tree. That's well beyond the 1-year bond release that builders have, right? Now I have a unique position. I'm the son of a builder. My father, Battlefield Homes, built homes all my life. So I was raised in the industry. So I know that, after a year, the builder is kind of out of the picture. And that's, he can't be around forever. I also understand that. But if we can identify these areas and even a couple inches of topsoil put over a root system, that critical root zone that we already established, can cause a decline of a tree. It doesn't even have to be compacted. It's just adding a little bit of that substrate to the top can suffocate those roots underneath and cause them to die and the subsequent tree to die. So we think of these trees as big, large, strong organisms, but they all come down to very fine root hairs that they depend on under the ground, and that's what we're trying to protect. 90% of tree problems, or 95% that I come in contact with, can be traced back down to the roots. People call me out and say, I have oak wilt, what's going on? No. Your sprinklers are saturating your roots. You've got beautiful green grass all over your roots. You're putting lime on it. That's your problem for that. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If you want to stick around afterwards, just in case anyone has more
I
questions.
love to talk trees. I don't have to do this very often.
Yeah, do you want to come to a presentation with us next week that we're doing?
I'm serious.
So this points out, the value of arborists. They can talk to you about individual tree physiology, explain the slight characteristics that are impacting trees. So again, whether you're overwatering soils and you're drowning roots, you can point out, structural defects that the layperson, wouldn't even notice, offhand. Very beneficial. And these are the folks that you want to give you a definite answer to your questions if you have them. The local folks that, run a chainsaw and have business cutting down trees, they may not have any tree care training. So, they may be cheaper, they may not have the same insurance that these ISA certified companies are required to have. And that explains the difference between the level of care that you pay for and why you should use a certified arborist.
Are there any other questions? I'm sorry. Were you finished? Any other questions? You have something else you'd like?
Just on the cost, you mentioned that, and it gets me going sometimes, because people see our equipment and they assume that they can't afford our services because we're professionals and we have, we utilize the safest equipment in the industry. But more often than not, and some of you might be here that have gotten quotes from the guy who stops by, in a pickup truck, and you think you're getting a good price, and then you have me come out, and for some reason I'm able to remove your tree for $1,000 cheaper, and they're flabbergasted. And I tell people, I said, we don't invest in this equipment so that we can charge you more. We invest in this so we can do our job more efficiently, hopefully bring costs down, and be able to provide a safer service at a competitive, if not lower price, absolutely a better value. So don't assume that it's a cheaper price just because they're not professional. Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
Well, hopefully you...
What's that? I can't disclose that right now because I'm speaking as an ISA certified arborist. Yeah. No. I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Back in the day, if a big skin mark was on a tree, people were painting. What, if anything, can be done to protect that big invasion into the actual
So it used to be common practice for a tar-based sealant, whether it be for a cambium scrape or even a pruning cut. And this has been something that's changed in my lifetime. Used to be ISA, recommendations back and to say that you painted it. But Alex Shigo did, his whole life was dedicated to researching trees, and a big part of it was the impact of pruning cuts to the health of a tree and the impact of decay from those pruning cuts. What he found was that a pruning cut a proper pruning cut left uncovered is just as likely or more likely to heal properly and to fight decay than one that has been treated with a tar-based sealant. What happens is that sealant is kind of it can prevent some fungal activity from coming in, but it can also trap moisture underneath of it, and it can prevent the cambium from closing that wound as quickly. Now, if you have a scrape on the side of a tree, sometimes there's nothing you can do. You can